Hello, welcome to Jophia Whispers. My name is Nairi. In an earlier video, I mentioned that we had been taught about Charles Darwin's theory of evolution in the 1960s as though it was a proven fact, when even Darwin himself had said that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, scientists have since discovered that the cells are indeed of what they call irreducible complexity. That's a term coined by biologist Michael J. Beer in the year 2000, meaning that if any element of this highly complex system is altered or absent, the cell is unlikely to continue functioning. Or on the rare occasion where mutation may not harm the cell, the possibility of it affecting any apparent changes in the organism are very slim, or if they did, would affect the population at such a slow rate that little would change over many generations. Certainly too slowly to explain how Homo sapiens might have evolved from, say, one of the closest hominids to our era currently known, Homo longi, which was found in northern China in 1933 and dated back to only 125,000 years. The ancient Egyptians lived around 5,000 years ago on current estimates, or 10,000 according to Robert Bovell. So Homo longi only goes back by a factor of 25 at the most, or maybe even only a factor of 12. That's not a great length of time in terms of evolution. So we can't have evolved that quickly. And why are more recent hominid fossils with features closer to ours not being found? Surely the closer samples to our own time would be more easily accessible. And while we don't know the answer to this, common sense would lead us to wonder why Darwin might be the benchmark. If his writings had never existed, why would we even consider the possibility that we evolved from another species? There's no clear evidence to support the idea, only a theory. And many religious teachings claim we were created by God. Well, then the question arises, what is God? But that's not part of this conversation. But that begs the question, where did we come from? Logic would dictate that if we didn't evolve from something else, if there's no evidence on planet Earth to support the fact conclusively, then perhaps we did suddenly appear, and perhaps from somewhere else within the cosmos. Well, can we prove that? There are many individuals who can provide fairly convincing evidence that our history does connect us to the cosmos, to other planets. But that's not an experience most of us can share, and for most of us there's not even a desire to look at the possibility because it's too confronting to our current reality and sense of security, and for some it even comes with an element of fear. But if there were any reason to fear, you'd think that would be evident to us. For others, it's of no interest because their lives are comfortable and they feel they have no need to know. I personally find the idea exciting. I want to know. I need to know because the truth's important to me. As I keep saying in my videos and in my book, knowledge is empowerment. But does it matter where we come from? And how might that affect our understanding of a God or of a universal consciousness? If you believe that life is what it is and we must just accept it, then of course the answer is no. But if you feel there's something not quite right with the world and you can't put your finger on it, then maybe it does matter. If you believe there's potential for improvement in the way we live as a species on this planet, then it certainly matters, because the implications are that everything we've been taught or believe can't be taken at face value. There may be better options which are not apparent to us yet. It also implies that if we can change our understanding of the nature of knowledge, we can change the way in which we make decisions and function together. And that might mean reconnecting to our humanity in a new way in order to create a quality of life we might wish to see for our species in the future. The big question is, do we need to perpetuate a system in which the majority of humans on the planet live in poverty, where we're preoccupied with gaining enough monetarily to feed ourselves and our families, where there are perpetual wars and where we're incrementally losing our freedoms to a digital system of control that in the long run may threaten our very humanity? Do we need to perpetuate that? So how did the work of Charles Darwin affect thinking of the time and our current paradigms? And what do we really know about our origins? What kind of thinking patterns might have been developed based on the theory of evolution that could have or still does influence the way we think, or have been persuaded to think for the last 150 years? All public thought at any point in time doesn't exist in isolation. The words used by Darwin were survival of the fitter, because he saw it as an evolving process. But the term survival of the fittest, which had been coined 7 years earlier by the English sociologist and philosopher Herbert Spencer, implied that those who are the most competitive will survive, and that competition is a natural quality in us. That phrase is the one most often used and has resulted in a misinterpretation of Darwin's words. And in any case, what if competition is learned behaviour? Well, yes, of course, boys like to fight and compete with one another, but that quality is obviously tied to reproductive imperatives. But it may or may not translate into other behaviours, and to run a survey on that would be almost impossible. But there are many aspects of fitness. Many have nothing to do with physical strength. Spencer claimed that if mankind follows a course of keeping the less fit safe, then the implication is they'll carry those weaker traits into following generations and lead miserable lives. Well, he might have been right, but that may also have just come out of the social mores of his time. And in any case, what did he mean by fit? So I haven't read his work, only a summary of it. But of course, the strongest physically are more likely to survive in war, as will those with superior weapons, as will women whose bodies are better designed for the birth process. But there are many other aspects of fitness that have nothing to do with physical strength, which might also be described as the fittest, such as intellectual prowess, having the ability to outwit one another through strategic thinking, having the ability to cooperate in order to collectively survive. And if the physically fittest wins a given scenario, then if circumstances change, they may no longer be the fittest. It implies a measurable standard and contradicts Darwin's basic conclusions. But the influence of Darwin's work was profound, although not universally accepted, especially among religious groups and those for whom it implied we were descended from animals. And we can't have that. But it has affected generations of thinking over the years, largely due to that misinterpretation of his findings. Many believed our cooperative social behaviour is driven by a self-centred urge to survive and reproduce, rather than any kind of altruism. And history was regarded by some to be a process of more powerful tribes eliminating less powerful tribes. That is, the natural elimination of less evolved races by more evolved races. Well, that's no longer an acceptable view, but at the time it appeared to provide justification for the genocide of groups not of Anglo-Saxon European origin who were regarded as inferior races. Unfortunately, it would also seem that many have taken the concept survival of the fittest to justify polarised and partisan thought in everything from politics to business, from race relations to personal relationships, regardless of any moral and ethical constraints. And if we believe it's in our nature to only act out of self-interest, then that implies we're not responsible and we can justify all sorts of behaviour that's not for the common good. And while that might be true on some level, what if it really is a result of collective myths and beliefs rather than our natural inclination? What if it is in fact learned or mislearned behaviour? But what if our ability to cooperate rather than compete is actually the fitter way? What if our nature is to look for leadership rather than repression and control? What if the political and social issues we face at this point in time are due to lack of true leadership and our inability to solve problems due to a lack of confidence in our own personal power and truth? If we ponder the intellectual climate at the time of Darwin, and I believe that's what drives most cultures, the thinkers, the creators of ideas, then we may understand the overall archetypal thinking inherited from that time. Let's go back to philosophers, but I mean more contemporary writers, not the ancients I referred to in past videos. We find then a philosophy known as social Darwinism in Western Europe and North America, with which Darwin had no association. But some of its adherents stressed that competition for dominance in financial areas, that is capitalism, spurred self-improvement. They believed in competition, while others supported eugenics, racism, imperialism, fascism as justifiable principles. Understandably, the prevalence of such thinking declined during the First and Second World Wars, but the rules of the game had already been set for those who adopted those ideals, and there was no stopping it. But that all came from a misinterpretation of Darwin. It was an invention. The inherent problem with applying those principles, apart from the fact that they disempower most of our species, is unconstrained materialism and funneled wealth at the expense of the environment, as well as the deeper social fabric of cooperation and shared resources. Both types of thinking come down to centralised control, which is what we have now, rather than what we would regard as democratic principles. Multinational corporations, decision-making bodies based on monetary gain rather than common wealth. Australia was once a member of a commonwealth. Now it's a government. And as a side, I'd like you to understand this and accept responsibility for it. Many of us, if not most of us, are motivated by greed at some level, not just the rich and powerful. Most of us want more or have been persuaded that we need more. And that very weakness is leading to our demise. Our lust for greater wealth and possessions has been used as a weapon against us by those who desire and create power. We are collectively part of the problem, not the victims of it. We are our own worst enemy. I want you to understand this, know this. Our power lies in not succumbing to that flaw in our nature. Own your own weaknesses. But back to the point. Social Darwinism was only one realm of thought at the time. For instance, Friedrich Nietzsche highlighted the idea of personal choice, of conscious awareness. He was about 25 years old when Darwin's work was written in the late 1800s, and famously wrote the phrase, "God is dead," in several of his works. He considered that formal religious practices created conformity to given moral and ethical standards, which were purely theoretical in nature, and that individuals should strive to become the best of themselves through personal struggle, through understanding what is right and wrong on a personal level. He was concerned that the moral values adopted by Christianity implied a measurable standard of moral excellence, which implied that some individuals were morally superior to the rest, and that it leads to a slave mentality where conformity to given standards removes personal integrity and sovereignty. And I quote this from Wikipedia. He held a pessimistic view of modern society and culture. He believed the press and mass culture led to conformity, brought about mediocrity, and that the lack of intellectual progress was leading to the decline of the human species. In his opinion, some people would be able to become superior individuals through the use of willpower. By rising above mass culture, those persons would produce higher, brighter, and healthier human beings, and, of course, in the process influence others. Power within oneself, not competition. So where do thoughts about knowledge fit into all this? All philosophy is speculation based on the principles of logic, but it's fallible, and is any philosophy based on real knowledge. Religions are philosophies, and in my opinion also speculation, although I'm not suggesting for one moment that religion's a bad thing. because its principles may not be based on definable knowledge. But it's a way of organising and uniting society with a common belief system that enables us to live together in a civilised manner, and it has served us well in many ways. But at the same time, it operates as a form of social control rather than guidance when it taps into our basic fears. And social control does not always support our basic needs. Perhaps that's why there's been such a drift away from formal religions during my lifetime, also partly influenced by Søren Kierkegaard and others. Existentialism also comes through Darwinism and assumes there's no grand plan, no higher consciousness, no God-given morality, and that human beings must make what they will out of life. If we can move into recognising that so much of what we believe, what we consider to be knowledge, is really speculation or blind trust, then we can take a step towards recognising our own ignorance and looking for more profound answers to the human condition. Knowledge, however, is an elusive thing. It's hard to define, and it can take many forms, both physical and non-physical. Or perhaps in reality it's unattainable. Perhaps there is a mysterious knowledge through which all religions have been developed, which have been lost or simply not shared widely. Perhaps the teachings of the early mystery schools were based on real, non-physical knowledge, which has never been available to non-initiates but still exists. Freemasonry, for instance, uses ancient, highly charged symbols which undoubtedly go all the way back to Egypt. For me, there are aspects of knowing which are a mystery, but to which I occasionally do have insight on a personal level. So many times I have known something without receiving outside information. I just know, and I'm sure many, if not all of you, have had that same experience. I'll give you a personal example though. One night my husband and I were driving to our beach house. It was dark, it was raining a little bit, but we were on open road and there was no traffic, so it seemed perfectly safe. But I suddenly started to feel quite anxious and asked him to slow down, which he wouldn't do. And then I was a little more persistent and said, please, I need you to slow down, and he still refused. He could see no logical reason to do so, and at some level I agreed with him. But I suddenly became quite panicky, almost hysterical. He must have thought I was crazy, and actually I thought I was being crazy too, but I was out of control. So he did slow down the car, just because he thought I'd do something really stupid. And just as we turned the next bend, there was a police car blocking the road with flashing lights, and beyond it, no road. It had been swept away down the hill, and there was a huge gap in the road. The two of us just sat there stunned. We were just stunned. I certainly had, how could I have had any knowledge, or not conscious knowledge, of what was about to happen? But something in my subconscious, or perhaps my guardian angel, did know. I've had similar experiences over the years, but much less dramatic. But can that experience be regarded as having some kind of knowledge, albeit unconscious? And can we tap into that? That could be really useful if we're constantly aware of it rather than denying its presence. So philosophy is conscious thought and therefore limited by language. So who can know whether the work of famous philosophers is based on deep knowledge or is just opinion? If their writings were based on deep knowledge, wouldn't they all agree with one another? But they don't. The ancient Egyptian language, the hieroglyphs, constitute almost 800 letters. Each of those letters had a specific meaning. Does that mean their thinking processes were more complex than ours? Does it mean they knew more than we do? Was philosophy part of their intellectual life? Or did they simply have a body of profound knowledge which has been lost to us and they didn't question? Or did they, like us, merely speculate? How much of our collective thinking can be understood as knowledge or opinion? Who's judging? There are many spiritual groups in the world looking for access to this deeper knowledge, and while many of them seem to be based on romantic narratives, many also are based on personal experience and deep understanding. But it does pay to be sceptical. It's easy to get caught up in a narrative which confirms our biases and appears to satisfy our deep need for answers to the nature of our existence, to which formal religions no longer appear to have the key. I take the position, pay attention to everything, believe nothing. And my basic principle in life has always been, look after your own needs first and harm no one. Isn't that what you're told on air flights? Put on your own oxygen mask first before attending others? And if we believed or are conditioned to believe that we should put others first, then we all become martyrs. And that's a no-win situation. But it does come with a huge responsibility. Can we ever, as a species, be knowledgeable enough and wise enough to adopt that as a universal principle? I live in hope. I'd be interested to hear your ideas by commenting below, and if you'd like to reach out, you can do so on my website, nairij.com. You can find a little bit about me there. You can see some of my paintings, listen to a little bit of my music, read some articles, and even read chapter 1 of Joffiel Whispers if you have the time or inclination. And if you're interested in Robert Boville's work on ancient Egyptian beliefs and connection to modern religion, I've put a link for you below. So if you found some connection to this conversation, please click the like button. I hope to see you next time. Until then, stay well, stay blessed.